Welcome to the Jack Westin MCAT podcast with your host, Phil Hawkins.
And Azaii Muñiz.
It's that time of year again. It's time for meetings with friends and family, and there's cheery attitudes all around, and everyone's trying to sell you stuff, and I'm sick of it. Okay.
I already buy too much as it is.
Yeah, that was a pretty strong reaction I had here. But we were thinking about, trying to keep with themes of episodes, and this episode is going to be dedicated to Black Friday
and Cyber Monday
and whatever Saturday and Sunday are, because I'm sure they have names at this point. But
they definitely have sales.
Yeah, I feel like we went the wrong direction on this. A part of me is like, we could have talked about like oxytocin and like being close to friends and family. We could talk about the digestive system with Thanksgiving. Like, no, we're going hard and cold. We're talking about sales techniques. But I do think that this is actually a pretty interesting area to understand how we can be persuaded to do things and to buy things. Persuasion isn't just about doing and buying stuff, though. Like if you're trying to persuade a patient to take their medication, or you're trying to persuade, somebody to go see a specialist, right? Even though they feel like it's not that severe. Like, no, listen, this is going to get much worse if you don't properly like regulate your glucose levels, right? Like you need to see a specialist and come up with a plan. And so persuasion is not just a force of evil in the universe. Persuasion is I don't know where I'm going with this. It's something that can be used either way. It's a sword that you can use for good or evil. I don't imagine a lot of people using swords for good these days, but I looking cool in LARPing.
Phil, do you own a sword, or have you been thinking about purchasing a sword?
Maybe someone can convince me to if they use a central route processing. We'll be talking about that here in a second. But I'm pretty excited because a lot of this stuff is actually really interesting. And it's not just about sales stuff, but being able to convince friends and loved ones, patients of stuff that is actually good for them. And also recognizing when maybe you're getting persuaded to do something. I think that can be useful as well.
Oh, 100%. And when we were talking about this, one of the first things that came to my mind, and should have had a full lunch before this, or should have had a full meal, was like when you're at the checkout counter, right? Or when you first walk into the store, how easy is it you grab your cart, right? And you're like, okay, Target is constantly blamed for relationship problems with people going in and buying more stuff than they think that they were going to go buy. So you have your shopping cart, right? And you decide, okay, I'm going to go into the store. You pulled it outside because that's where they keep the shopping carts most of the time. They're doing this on purpose. Mm-hmm. So especially at Aldi's, they have the aisles that you have to go through. Mm-hmm. So, you're going in and you see something and you're like, oh, that looks good. That's some high quality chocolate. Or, depending on, I think everyone here is probably of age, but like, oh, that they have some really good wine there. They're like advertising some really good wine, or like, maybe you're just seeing a lot of chips on the way in, or, during different holiday seasons, all of these like holiday decorations and whatnot. And so that's the first thing that you see. And we've talked about this idea before, the primacy and recency effect, remembering you're more likely to remember what you first see and what you last see. So then you go through and you've walked around the aisles and you start getting some of the things that you planned on getting. Or maybe you forget if you're like me. I don't know how many times I've gone to the store. I think at this point it's like 4 times. I've gone to the store to get candles. I get everything but matches for my candles. I've gotten everything but the matches for my candles. So I have not turned on my candles since I moved here. But yeah, so you go, you start getting some other stuff, and then you're like, oh, I'm kind of in the mood for some chocolate. They had a really nice chocolate there at the front. Let me go back and get that chocolate, right? And then, you finally have your cart, and it's a little fuller than you think it should be, right? But then you get to the end, and you're at the checkout counter, and now you see some other things. Now you see some magazines. Now you see some more chocolate. Now you see the gum,
chips.
like, huh?
Bag of chips, Doritos.
Bag of chips. Oh,
oh,
100%.
Yeah.
And so you're waiting there and you're just like, okay, you're not thinking, oh, I forgot to grab the sauerkraut, right? That's not what you're thinking at the checkout
The matches.
Yeah, matches. Listen, if they put the matches at the checkout counter, I would not be in this mess. But there, what you last see before you check out, you're more likely to grab, right? You're remembering what you saw when you first walked into the store. You're remembering what is just in front of you or what you just saw. And so not just in a malicious way, right? But people who are, working in different stores, they know what they're doing. And so they're placing something that is eye level, grab it. Even if you're not actively looking at it, it's in your peripheral vision, right? Mm-hmm. So what you first see and what you last see, check your cart the next time you do that. Although now you might be a little bit more cautious, but think back to your cart the last time that you were walking in a grocery store or any kind of store and what ultimately made it into your cart.
Yeah, especially if you're hungry, then it gets real bad real fast. Yes. But I feel like I'm going to talk about Costco a lot today because I love Costco. I am a Costco fanboy somehow. And I know we weren't planning on talking about this, but there's something interesting with willpower. Mm-hmm. And that there's a lot of studies that show that willpower is kind of like like everybody starts their day with a pool of willpower that as the day goes on, they spend it to do certain things. And so I always know, like, if I'm trying to be healthier or that sort of thing, like I've been trying to get 12,000 steps every day. And like in the mornings, I'm great. I always hit my walks and I'm like taking my walks and I'm like, I never miss my walk. I wake up early in the morning, like 6 o'clock to go for the walk with the dog because I should, even though it's cold and dreary. The evening walk, I missed that a lot. I missed it last night. I'm like, oh, I have like 10,500 steps. I only need like 1,500 more steps. I should just go for a walk. I'm like, but I'm so tired. And I'm like, my willpower is spent. It's gone. And I think that there's studies that show that if you are forced to make decisions, you're more likely to cave in the later decisions. And so, and like walking around the store, you might like be walking around. And as I'm going, like I'm pretty good at the beginning, but then once I'm checking out, that's when I'm like, okay, I'm going to get a bag of Doritos and some beef jerky for the drive home because I'm hungry and like, it's fine, like everything. But like, if there's no way I would have grabbed that at the beginning, but I've just spent willpower going through this. I don't talk about family stuff that often either, but this is a big inside scoop. Everyone's going to be involved. Everyone knows that I'm just going to live at Costco now and be like walking around. But I also do, I do some fostering stuff. And very often I'll like take, the kids and we'll go to like Costco because of course that's where I'm going to go. And they're like, at the beginning, they're always asking me like, hey, can we get this? And I'm like, no, we don't need that. We don't need that. But then about like halfway through or like 2/3 of the way through, they're like, hey, can we get this? And I'm like, I feel bad for saying no so much. I'm like, yeah, okay, it's fine. We'll get that. It's not that unhealthy, right? There's juice in that like 150 pack of fruit snacks. Costco, and I'll just kind of like cave a little bit because willpower, I've kind of like used it up. I've used up my willpower to say no up until that point, and then all of a sudden we've kind of reached a new area.
Listen, if they can get you to do something once, coming again.
Yeah, and that that's kind of related to some other things like there's the foot and door phenomena, right? And the flip of it, which we may talk about as well. Because now that I'm thinking about it, I think the kids might be doing the flip of that to me. But the foot and door technique is this idea of like, if you ask for something or like, so we use this technique. The idea is like, as a salesperson who was a door-to-door salesperson, right? Like I know this job kind of doesn't exist anymore, but you'd like knock on the door and you'd start talking to the person. You're trying to convince them to buy like a vacuum cleaner, right? And you don't just like knock on the door and say, hey, you want to buy a vacuum? Because everyone's going to say no and shut the door, right? What you do is you say, hey, I'm really thirsty. Can I get a glass of water? I've been walking up and down the street all day. And like, once you do something for that person, you're more likely to continue doing things for that person. And so this often gets, like in terms of sales stuff, this happens especially when you buy electronics or tools or things like that. Like you buy a tool and then you go to the register and they're like, hey, would you like to buy the extended warranty on this? And you're like some people are like, yeah, fine, okay. And the idea there is like, if like nobody goes in with the purpose of buying the warranty, but if you're buying this thing, you might as well buy the warranty on top of it. So it's like a foot in door thing that like once you agree to the first step, you're more likely to agree to things after it.
Yeah, and it sounds like depending on what your kiddos are doing, it could be foot in the door phenomenon, right? It could be that later they start asking you for some more sweet.
Yeah. Well, if we can have fruit snacks, can we have this?
Yeah.
I'm pretty good at saying no after the second or third thing.
My parents were more strict. And now that I'm older, they have softened. But yeah, and I think you brought up, and I don't think we were planning on talking about door in the face.
Yeah, the door in the face,
which is the opposite. But the idea there is like if they asked you first, hey, can we get this new TV? Right? You're definitely gonna say no. You're gonna be like, first of all, I think Costco has TVs.
Yeah, they do.
It's like it's basically what like I was gonna say BJ's. I'm throwing my mind off. Sam's Club. There we go.
Yeah.
That's the one I'm more familiar with. So, maybe they ask you for like a new TV, a new phone, a new rocking chair because they like crocheting. I don't know. I'm thinking of one of my friends.
Yeah.
But you're gonna say no, and then they come and ask you, "Can we get some fruit snacks?"
Yeah.
You're gonna say yes.
Right? And that's the door and face technique is you make an unreasonable demand first, so they say no, and then when you make a request afterwards, they're like, oh, okay, well, you can have that thing since I said no earlier.
Yeah, and they're pretty effective actually if you think about it. So
I mean, that's always exactly what happens when I say no to the first two things and then I say yes to the third. So I feel like maybe they've just figured it out and they're like, okay, we know the thing we want is over here. So we got to find two things to ask for on the way. And then we'll kind of like go from there.
Don't get me started. Recently my thoughts on like relationships and like people, how they interact with one another and how we're all essentially training each other.
Mm-hmm. I'm being trained.
You're being trained, Phil.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so this idea, right, is these two ideas were just about getting someone to do something. There's also a whole other set of ideas that are still related to getting someone to do something, but it's more presented or it's more based on the way information is presented to you rather than have I asked for something bigger? Will I ask for something bigger, etc. And again, just kind of being very thinking back, it's called the elaboration likelihood model. And so the idea is I'm going to present you some message, and depending on how I think you're going to receive the message or what you're going to do with my message will determine how I choose to present it to you, because I'm making an assumption about my audience when I'm deciding how to present my message. And so ultimately, it's going to depend on whether I think you're really going to analyze it or if I can get away with some, a little sus, a little on the side.
Yeah. Just make it sound good sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so with this, there's a central route versus a peripheral route. So the central route is very, like if the audience you think is going to be analytic, if you think that they're going to reason through this and going through this, then you want to present the information in a way that is reasoned and analytic, right? Like you should buy this car because it's got the most headroom, it's got the highest torque, it's got the best fuel economy, like all of those things. That's different than buying a car because it's pretty, right? Like there's a difference between those two things. And so this central route is very focused on kind of like data and that sort of stuff. The problem is the audience, the people you're selling it to, in order for them to kind of buy into this, it takes a lot of effort on their part. Like they need to look at the data. They need to pay attention to this stuff. They need to reason through this. They have to assess your message of like, is that thing valuable and how valuable is that thing to me? And like, so it's a lot more effort for them, but it's also tends to like stick in someone's mind a little bit better. And so to kind of like talk I know you said like, oh, Costco, that's like Sam's Club. And like inherently, I'm like, no, it's not even close to Sam's Club. And so the reason I like Sam's Club and the reason Costco, the reason I like Costco and shop at Costco, Sam's Club shall not be mentioned. I don't think we're ever going to get a sponsorship from Walmart, but the reason I shop at Costco is because of their business decisions. Like Costco pays all of their employees, even their cashiers. I think it like starts at like 20, and like most cashiers are making like $25 an hour.
Nice.
Even in like rural places, and like it doesn't matter where, like they have a standard where they like how they run their business. Like they want everyone who works at Costco to enjoy working there. A lot of employees at Costco call it the dream killer, because they go to Costco and they start working and they make like a good wage and they make money. And they're like, listen, like I don't need to go do this thing and do like this 10 years of training to do the thing that I want. Like I can live a good life the way that I am now. And I like a company that treats their employees well. And so there's things kind of like going through this and reasoning through. I think their CEO started off as a cashier, and he like worked his way through this, and now he's the CEO of Costco, or at least he was a couple of years ago. I don't know if he still is, but basically the company itself, like the decisions that they make and how they go through this I have reasoned through, like that's a company I want to support, right? Because of those decisions. And so a part of me would shop at Costco, even if I didn't like the food as much there, or like I drive farther to go there. And sometimes it's a little annoying that I have to buy 10 pounds of oatmeal if I just want to have oatmeal one morning. But we just finished off some oatmeal that we've been working on for a year. But I want to support this company. And I like that company. And that's a very central route processing sort of thing. Thing is, like, I don't think that Costco expects most of their customers to go through this like research into different company practices and different things like Sam's Club versus Costco. And so Sam's Club doesn't treat their employees nearly as well. And so that's what's important to me about Costco. And so like in my mind, Sam's Club is the exact opposite, although the experience of shopping at either of them is probably very similar to each other in terms of how things work. But it's kind of a central route going through that. You also, we're talking about this in terms of selling stuff. You also like this is also about persuasion, right? If my teachers wanted to persuade me that smoking causes cancer, right? They should give me data, right? And all of a sudden, like pouring through this, like understanding the relationships, understanding how it works, understanding what's going on in the alveoli. Like they've given me a whole lot of information, and I have come to the conclusion, they have persuaded me, yes, smoking causes cancer. And that is something that I am on board with. It's going to be really, really hard for someone to convince me otherwise, right? And that's kind of the power of the central route processing. It does take a lot more effort for me to kind of figure this out. But now, like, it's going to be really hard for someone to make me change my mind, because it's based on this kind of like analytic reasoning side of things.
Yeah. And I think that's where, like, even this podcast comes into play, because we could sit here, right, and just talk and say, yep, the MCAT is important, or like last week, yeah, cars is important. But if we don't give you like a clear message, explanation, something that you can analyze and decide for yourself, yes, this is actually the case, right? These things are important. Then we haven't done our job, right? And so and this should go for most education in general, but you're absolutely right. And so on the flip side of that, and actually going back to Costco, so I actually had no idea, but I love that they pay everyone so well. I actually don't, since it's just me, I don't shop at like big bulk stores. I just can't, because if I tried to finish a 10 pound thing of oatmeal, it would take me a little more than a year. But the kind of the flip side of central route processing is going to be peripheral route. And so this is where I don't expect my audience to sit down and do a lot of analysis or really try and dissect my message. They're not really motivated. And so in this case, whatever I present to them, I'm not going to put in as much of the, hard facts, analytical intention. It's going to be low effort for them. So whatever kind of outside cues I throw at them are actually more important than having a very clear, perhaps a little dry message, because that's not what's going to get to them. That said, I can get them to act and be persuaded by these external cues, but that's not really going to stick. It's more temporary, more transient. And so, for example, if I told you, if anyone's watching this, gray's nice. The people who wear gray, they're nice people. They may not be very smart, but like, they're the kind of people you want in your life, right? And so, if you're watching this, you're seeing that I'm in a gray jacket. And so, you see someone that's wearing gray and you're like, oh, they seem nice enough. Maybe, I don't know if they're smart or not, right? But like, I can buy into gray. People who wear gray, they're nice. But I didn't go into a whole spiel about why gray would be related to kindness or anything like that. But you're not going to remember, you're not going to leave this conversation. And the next time you see someone wearing gray, you're going to be like, yes, you are a nice person, right? Yeah. Every single time you see someone. And so you're going to be prone to just forgetting it. But this, when people are trying to decide, what route, and again, this may be on some part conscious, on some part subconscious, when they're trying to decide how they're going to persuade you, they are making assumptions about how you will behave and how you will interpret and act on their information. And so what's really cool and scary about, the holiday seasons, the selling seasons, is that they know that they're going to have folks from both ends of the spectrum, and sellers will act accordingly.
Yeah. And that's a really interesting thing, especially like this time of year when like everyone's trying to sell stuff for the holidays and things like that. You'll see so this like peripheral stuff, it's all kind of about appearances, right? I often think of like this has a lot to do with ads, like advertisements and things like that. There's a reason that people in advertisements tend to be attractive because we just inherently like attractive people and we're more likely to listen to attractive people. That doesn't mean that the stuff they're saying is right? That doesn't mean that it's true or that it's good science or things like that. If we're talking about talking about medications, like drugs, drug advertisements and medication advertisements. Some of you guys outside the US, if you're listening to this, might be like, what are you talking about? There's a lot of advertisements for medications in the US, which is a little bit weird. We're not going to go into that. I also have some problems with that, but they will have an actor wear glasses because that makes you think they're smarter. Right. And so, that attractive, physician there wearing glasses, right. With he's got silvered hair and he's attractive and older and wearing glasses. He's knowledgeable, he's trustworthy, he's all of this stuff. When really it's just he just based on the way he looks. And so a lot of times you also see this with beer commercials, right. Where it's the idea is they're showing people partying and attractive and having fun, right? And so you watch that and you're like, yeah, I want to be attractive and have fun, so I should drink this beer, right? I should drink Bud Light, right? They don't that happens sometimes when people drink Bud Light, but also it could be somebody passed out on a hotel room floor with vomit on the floor. That also happens sometimes or has happened. And that would not be a good ad. Nobody is saying hey, I want that, right? That sort of thing. But all of those are different than that sort of central route, right? Of how they go into, tons of details on stuff. Sometimes you'll see ads 30% of patients experienced decrease in their blood pressure after taking this medication or whatever it is. They give you some data. The thing is, most especially with ads, they tend to do peripheral for the most part because most people are thinking about an ad, a newspaper ad or a television ad or on whatever streaming stuff you're watching. An ad is something that you aren't specifically looking for that thing, right? It's just that ad came up. Like if I'm specifically looking to buy a blanket, right, or buy a car, then I'm going to do a bunch of research. But if I'm not specifically looking to buy something, they could show me an ad for something and maybe I'd buy it, right? But so because they have this audience that isn't searching for something, like they tend to go peripheral. They also have a limited amount of time, and most people don't want to put in a ton of effort and work into these things. The other thing is, like, it also kind of depends on the product, right? If something is really expensive or really important, you're probably more likely to put in some effort in researching that thing. And so like if I'm buying a house, if I'm buying an MCAT prep course, right? Like this is really important. Like I need to do well on the MCAT, right? And so I am gonna do central route processing. If I'm buying a car, right? Things like that. I'm gonna weigh the options. I'm gonna go through and compare and contrast, right? Like who's got, like in terms of courses, who's got the most live recordings or recordings to watch? Who's got the most live sessions I can go to? Who's got the most, this or that? And so going through that, you will kind of like start to get an understanding of, okay, I should lean away from this company and towards this company or vice versa or back and forth. But that, like, if we're talking about buying like a new bedspread, right? Or a new like a pillow for your couch, like a throw pillow, I am not going to do any research on that, right? Like I am just
research the bedspreads.
Oh, you would research the, see, I would not.
I research my sheets.
So you're the target audience for that like high central route processing thing. And so understanding like how they target audiences and how they go through stuff. This is also something that you'll see like as a physician with like pharmaceutical sales reps who are trying to convince you to buy or to prescribe their medication. And so these are people whose job it is to convince you to use that medication. Something that happens, I don't want to like say, I don't want to say that these people don't know what they're talking about or things like that. I'm not saying that at all. But most often these people are attractive, right? And they are like salespeople tend to do better when they're attractive. I'm not saying they have to be attractive, or I'm not saying if they're not attractive, they can't do a good job, but being more attractive helps with that peripheral route. Now, if you can also do central on top of that, awesome, right? A pharmaceutical sales rep who seems very convincing and calm and fun and entertaining. And I like am happy to see this person come in and then they give me some data and the data's all really good. Yeah, I'm convinced. I probably want to prescribe this medication. The data's all there. Like I like this person and that will convince people. Now, if you're making that decision just based on, oh, this person's really attractive, so I'll prescribe their drug. Like that's probably not a good way to do that thing. I can see you having like a small seizure, Azaii, at the idea of that. Like, oh no. And so
accurate.
Yeah. And so this is something we want to kind of like think about, like the way that ads are done and the way that ads are done, like, shown to people. There's also sales stuff, which I think like factors in as well, as I know you have a lot of, you were very passionate about this earlier.
Yes. So we said that, keeping can be kind of in theme with things. We talked about like Black Friday, whatever Saturday and Sunday are, Cyber Monday, even though they tend to extend it to like through Thursday, but whatever. They play off of this so much, whether we realize it or not. And they know that they're going to have people who are genuinely shopping for a good deal. And they've been looking forward to this day for months because they want to buy a TV and I don't know why I'm thinking of TVs today. They want to buy a TV. They want to make sure that they're getting the best deal on the best possible product, right? And they also are going to have people that are like, I don't know if I want to go wait in line, right? Or maybe I'll just get like one or two things. And so they know that they have to target both the people who are using central route processing and the people who are using peripheral route processing, right? So for the folks that are using central route processing, they're going to do things like show you the percent discount, but also let you know that they price match, let you know what else comes with it to make it a good bundle that's worth the cost, right? They know that you're going to have done your research. So then they're also going to provide some comparison in the advertisement with different products. And so that way you're more likely to buy one of their products because you've had the chance to compare and you know that it's going to be a better deal and that there's extra stuff thrown in, right? But you're still going to come back and buy one of their products. Whereas for the people who are like, I don't think I want to go stand in line, or, I know like other holidays are coming up and I'm going to have to spend some more money. So let me maybe hold off. They'll throw things like, oh, like buy this and then get this, and these are small things sometimes free, right? Or like, oh, this is just $10. Like come in as long as it's before 1:00, right? Mm-hmm. And so they have like big flashy advertisements. And like you said, maybe they're going to have some advertisements on TV and they're going to be really flashy. They're going to have those attractive people who are like putting on boots and the boots are on sale for like $20. And they're like, yes, they're normally whatever price. Mm-hmm. Amazon does this too with their Prime days. They will temporarily increase the price of something before it goes on Prime Day sale. And then they'll decrease it a little more than the usual. So you think you're getting this fantastic discount. But if you have placed what you're interested in ahead of time and then go look at it, not usually a super huge difference. And so they are, in that case, really focusing on the people who are using peripheral route of processing. And so if you think about the second group of people that I talked about with like that Black Friday, Saturday kind of sale that you have to go in person, when they get you to come in before 1 p.m. for that $10 item, foot in the door, guess what's going to happen, right? You're going to keep buying. And like you were saying, your willpower is going to drop. So the longer you stay in that store, the more you will buy. The question becomes, did you actually get a good deal or not? Maybe you did. Maybe you got a fantastic deal on that TV that you've been waiting, 3 months to purchase. Or maybe that $10 deal was actually a good deal, but then everything you bought afterwards wasn't. And so they really play off of this. And I think it's helpful to know it. It may not fully change what we do, but it's still helpful to understand how people in these like large retail stores are targeting their consumers, because at the end of the day, that's what we are. We're their consumers.
Yeah. And I think one of the reasons you're probably going to like TV, I was thinking about, is just TVs are expensive. Yes. And so you're going to have more people doing central route processing, like more people doing research for this, for something expensive like that. Now versus like gum, I don't think there's anybody out there who's doing a bunch of research on sticks of gum. Like this one is a pretty package and it tastes good. I'm going to buy it.
I kind of want to now.
Yeah, I kind of do too. But this is useful to kind of understand. And like, I know we talked about this a lot in sales because it's the Black Friday spectacular. But this is absolutely still stuff that you're going to see in like convincing patients of things, convincing stuff. Like if Costco wanted to increase the number of memberships of people who are using this, they could go around with a flyer about all this information about how every single one of their employees has full like health and dental benefits, and they pay their cashiers really well. Not a lot of people are going to be like, oh, I should shop at Costco. But if you go and say like, hey, this TV is like $1,500, but now you can get it for $1,000, like someone's like, oh, I should go to Costco, right? And so there's some differences between this, and there are definitely people who will do more central versus peripheral. I've already kind of pointed out, like there's some very concrete reasons, and I'm really unlikely to change my viewpoint on Costco at this point. Like I am sold on this.
It's done.
Yeah, and that's just because it's a central route. Like I have like this reasoning kind of going through this, but you see this with patients a lot, where I want to be kind of careful, because there's a lot of people who get convinced that this is going to help them with their disease. This is what you need. This is what's going to help overall. And a lot of that stuff is very peripheral route focused. Like I'll see stuff on Facebook often, and I'm just like, I just like kind of like shake my head. I want to be careful, because there might be some people here that have very strong reasons, and maybe I'm just uninformed, but I have some knowledge about what a crystal is. Crystal, like a physical state of matter, it just means structures of atoms and a crystalline lattice. I don't think that's going to cure someone's diabetes, right? Because I know how diabetes works. I know what crystals are, but like I once had somebody convince me that if you crystallize ginger and give it to a diabetic, it'll cure them of their diabetes. And I'm like, nope, not convinced, right? First off, by crystallization, do you mean cover it in sugar and dehydrate it? And they're like, yeah. And like, I guess. I'm like, they didn't really know what crystallizing meant. And I'm like, you're feeding sugar to diabetics if that's what you're if that's what you're doing there, which is not a good idea, right? But somebody had told them, somebody probably attractive and a thing that like sounds good. There's a lot of times where people will advertise stuff. Like I have some very strong feelings on this. Advertise things as like, oh, it's natural, or it's like something like that. I'm like, just because something is natural doesn't mean it helps scenarios, right? Yeah. Like some people who hate medicine and love like natural stuff. But I mean, like if something is natural and it helps, that's medicine. Like aspirin, that's made from willow trees, right? Like that's where we discovered this, was in willow tree bark. And so now it's a medication, right? And we like use this molecule, acetylsalicylic acid. So just because something is natural doesn't mean it's good, right? So like hemlock is natural. It'll kill you if you eat it. So is gravel. Probably shouldn't eat that, right? Like that's a naturally occurring thing.
Vitamins, not digested well.
Yeah, vitamins and like those concentrated forms are that's not a very naturally occurring thing, but it will help you if you have vitamin deficiencies. And so there are times when I will see things on Facebook kind of like pushing like a new like cure or a new thing to kind of go through this. And it's always peripheral route. Nobody is explaining like how this crystal will help you stop smoking, right? Or how this crystal will cure your diabetes. They're just saying like, buy this crystal. It's really pretty. And like, here's somebody like a pretty picture. And like, they'll just say it does all these things, but they don't back it up. And there's no like science and there's no things through this. And maybe, and like this can be a problem for physicians because patients are persuaded by these things. There are times I've had like family members that are like doing stuff. I'm like, listen, like I know you're having problems with this, but this is not the way to treat this thing. This is not the way to deal with it. It's not a healthy way of dealing with this. And I think like it's something I have to be kind of careful of because like I said, there are some things that, yeah, there's some science behind it, like aspirin, like how that works. Yes. Like if you have a headache, chewing on a piece of willow will help. Like if you cut a branch off and chew on it. Yes. Yeah. There's something to that, right? Because of the chemistry and kind of like what's going on with this. And so it's one of those things where you don't want to say just like, it's wrong. Right. But like, if somebody says like ginseng cures diabetes, like I want to know more, right? Like I'm going to have a skeptical frame of reference depending on how these things are persuaded. But a lot of these things also on Facebook, the people who post them, like if you fast forward a year later, they're posting something else for a completely other thing. And that's how this like peripheral stuff works. Is like people don't get like engulfed in it and they say like no, they don't have these like rock solid hard beliefs, and they tend to be more flexible. And so like 1 week it's crystals, 1 week it's crystallized ginger, 1 week it's raw ginger, 1 week it's something else, and it just keeps kind of changing.
And I do want to take a moment to pause that.
Yeah,
like this does not mean that Western medicine is the end all be all, because yes. I think that's where some students might be listening and be like, okay, but like you don't know, and that's the thing. There are so many things growing up that my parents and mostly my mom, my grandma, would tell me to do. And like, they helped. And whether it was placebo or not, who knows? But then as I got older, I would start looking these things up and I was like, there's science behind this,
yeah,
and they didn't convince me with the science, but there ended up being science behind it. And so I think that's something that we need to keep in mind as future physicians, that even, in other forms of like healing or some more Eastern practices, things that they've been doing for generations that work, there may be science that we don't know about it. And so as future physicians, we have to make sure that we're not going in to an appointment with a patient who has like an alternative healing practice, and that we're saying that's useless, like stop doing that here, take this medication, because then you've also eroded the trust with that patient, right? But understanding that for them, they might have gotten that through peripheral route of processing, right? There may or may not be science behind it. And so like you said, Phil, you know, for us that we've been doing this for so long, we're just kind of curious and we feel like we need that central route of processing right away. But it is important to note that there are also a lot of supplements and things out there that people purchase as like through peripheral route of processing that are dangerous for them. Yeah. And so I've definitely had to have conversations with patients who, I have one in particular, and it like really breaks my heart. But we had to have a conversation about a supplement because they thought it was helping their terminal illness, and the symptoms with that terminal illness. And like the reality is it wasn't, and it was precipitating more problems. And, you know, having that conversation and having to switch into a central route of processing where just that need for something allowed the peripheral route to initially take over. And so those are things that, you know, aside from, I got all hyped up about advertisements because that's what we were talking about with this podcast. But I completely agree with you, Phil. Like there's so much that applies to your career as a future physician that's incredibly important and that you don't want to lose sight of, because it's also going to affect the relationship you have with your patients and knowing where and when to meet them.
Yeah. And I want to be, I'm glad you kind of stepped in there because you're right. Like there are some things outside of Western medicine that are useful and powerful and things. And some things may be placebo effect, but some things may actually have like some actual real effects going through things. Mm-hmm. You'd have to be careful with the placebo effect, right? Because then you have somebody who's got like, you know, a broken back and someone told them to take ginger and that'll help them with their like nerve regeneration. That actually happened to a family member of mine. And so they were spending like hundreds of dollars every month on this like really special like ginger capsule thing. And I'm like, okay, this is not a thing that like, I don't think that this is actually going to help. But like they said, they felt better after they took it. And I'm like, okay, I don't want to tell you to quit, like as long as it isn't dangerous, but like it's also expensive. And like, I know like finances are tight. And so it's something that can be a little bit tricky going through there. So I agree, but I think I've just ran into some places where people have used peripheral route stuff. I once had a patient who was told by their chiropractor to quit taking their insulin, and that they should instead just go to the chiropractor twice a week, and that they won't need to take their insulin anymore. And I'm like, oh, like I immediately hate this chiropractor because what they're doing is like they're enriching themselves at the expense of the patient's health. And like, don't get me wrong, like I definitely don't think every chiropractor is like that. And I think that there are times that it may be worthwhile going to a chiropractor, but that one chiropractor like made me furious. And there were some phone calls that were not very happy for the chiropractor at this point. But like there are things that you will see people like use some of these things. And I just want people to be careful, especially if things are only ever presented on a peripheral route, that like maybe you just have to be careful is probably the best way to put that.
Yeah. And it's also totally okay if someone's coming at you with a peripheral route of processing to ask them for essentially, like, obviously you're not going to be like, what is the central route, right? But asking them for it. I've actually been to a chiropractor in the past, and I asked how it worked. And I was like, okay, show me on the skeletal model that you have up. I want to know what's going on. And they were super into it, and they were totally great at explaining. And so I felt comfortable. But if they had just been like, yeah, I'm just going to cure all your problems, I would be like, bye. And so it's important to also advocate for yourself. I think it's really easy to forget to do that sometimes, and to encourage your patients to advocate for themselves. Superpowers, activate.
Yeah.
And I think, we were initially going to go into another example about how like even grocery stores do this, but I think we've kind of at this point hopefully made it clear, and I don't think we need to do that, but even grocery stores will do a lot of the same things that sales, larger retail stores will do during sales periods.
Yeah. Just one side note. I know I've mentioned this to you as the other day I saw a Butterfinger, and on it said made with real ingredients. And my brain just like, I got so angry. I'm like, that what they're claiming is that this isn't imaginary. That's what that claim is. It's made with real things, right? Not imaginary things. And I'm just like, why? Like sometimes I get annoyed by advertisements and the way things are presented. But yeah, that's definitely a thing. There are some, like, looking at other ways that people just like persuade stuff. There's some other factors in here, and a lot of these we've kind of talked about. Like whether or not you like the person. Like if you like someone, you're more likely to listen to what they're saying, right? And like that could do to like, attractive or things like that. But also just like, I mean, you like, Azaii, if you told me something, I'm immediately like going to be like, yeah, okay, that makes like, I'm probably going to trust that overall. Cause I see you as a trustworthy person and I like you as a person. And I immediately just like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Like if Azai's on board with this, then I'm gonna like give it the benefit of a doubt at the very least, if I don't just jump in on it.
I think we do that because people don't really know kind of what goes on behind the scenes for these podcasts. We do chat about like what we're thinking about, discussing and whatnot. And then these are one take. So what you see is actually,
students. Yeah.
So for the students, like this is like what you see is what is happening live. But yeah, like there have been so many times where, as you were talking, I was like, oh, is ginger an anti-inflammatory? Maybe that's what's going on. But like we do this and we'll both bring something up and then we're like, okay, let's double check because we don't want to say the wrong thing to our students. And so in that case, it's like we're seeing each other as trustworthy, and then we're going the extra step because of the people that we're doing this for. Right. And so I think that's also something to keep in mind, that if it depends also the target, like they're targeting their message to you, right? So I'm targeting my message to you, or you're targeting your message to me, but ultimately we're taking on an additional level of responsibility, and we're not sticking to peripheral, in part because we're people who like the central route of processing, but also because the people that we're going to be conveying the message to, we want to make sure that we're being as accurate as possible. So that's also something I don't think we talked about, but is important because of the way that messages are relayed, they can change, and the route of processing can change. So for example, right, if I got something and I did all this central route processing and then I tried to do it with my parents and it didn't work the first time, and then I go peripheral and it works, and I'm like, okay, well, I know the science behind it is good. We'll go with it for now. But the other thing is we also all just have implicit biases. There's this really great quiz online that they've had us take a couple of times at HMS about implicit biases. And if you ever come across it, it's a really cool like quiz to take, because you're just like, whoa. And we all have these implicit biases, whether we realize them or not. And I think one of them that is really obvious in advertisements is weight. A lot of people have an implicit bias against like larger body sizes, habitus, weight. And so a lot of times you're going to see advertisements with very thin people, right? Or there's been a move a lot right now about having, people of average size here in the US in advertisements and in clothing advertisements and things like that. And that was a way of playing off of an implicit bias, but it's peripheral. It's not something that they're actively telling you, you have to be this, thin or this size. Because people come in all sizes, right? And healthy can be in different sizes or different forms. And so I think that it's really easy to miss that as a possible peripheral route of processing because we don't like thinking about our implicit biases, right? They make us uncomfortable. It's like, I don't want to think that way, but in a society where that message has been like propagated so much, it's really easy to internalize something as an implicit bias that then can be played off of and reinforced. And that's another way that this can happen.
Yeah, that's a really big thing for physicians, like as well. Like the thing with implicit biases is that they're implicit, right? Yeah, they're like subconscious. Like you're kind of not even aware that you have them, but like people have biases, like in this case, like based on weight, but also the way people speak, skin color, gender, things like that. Like all of these kind of affect the way that that physicians treat their patients. And so that's a kind of an important thing to keep in mind. And that's an important thing to be aware of, which I'm guessing is why they had you do that, is like, try to become aware of your own biases as an experimental thing. That sounds fun. I want to do that now.
I might put the link in the description, because I think I think it's worth doing, because it definitely makes you think more actively when you're seeing patients. And again, that's just because what I've been doing recently. But even just when you're interacting with the world, part of the way that we this was not what I was planning on going into, but part of the way that we address biases is first being aware of them, and second, like actively thinking about them when we're interacting with people that we might have this bias towards or for, because it's not just against, right? It's also having a bias towards that can also cause some issues. But in any case, the spiel about that is as is. We're also just like prone if someone has similar experiences, right? Or similar traits, or Phil, right? The fact that you went to med school, I'm going to be more likely to relate to you because we have that shared experience, right? Whereas if someone is trying to tell me about med school, but they've never even stepped foot in a med school, I'm like, stop. Mm-hmm. Like they might actually have great information, but you haven't been there. So we don't have that shared experience, right?
Right. Exactly.
So that's something that can play a role.
Yeah. And that is something like, obviously, like if I'm trying to learn more about medical school and I'm talking to someone who's been to medical school, yes, like I'm going to have a bias kind of like to like go with that person. I think that one's, if anything, kind of a healthy one, but you also like people just tend to have biases for people who have similar experiences just in general. So people who grew up in the same sort of environment I did, I'm going to trust them more than people who grew up in a different scenario. This is something you definitely want to be aware of. And I don't think this is necessarily a healthy one to have, because I know I've mentioned this before, but I grew up in a rural area. Like if I automatically trust everyone who's rural and distrust everyone who lives in a city, like that's not healthy. That's not a good way of doing this. But we all do have this kind of like, there's something kind of hardwired into us that makes us want to trust people who seem like us, right? Because like, at least subconsciously, you're like, oh, they're like me and I wouldn't lie to me. And like, so automatically you're like, yes, that sort of thing I'm on board with. And this is something, especially when you start to deal with different populations, like you really want to be aware of this with different, minority groups and things like that. Like you want to be aware of this thing that people inherently trust people like themselves. And like, that's important for you to understand when you're talking to patients, but also it's something that is important from the patient's side. Patients will tend to trust physicians that they can relate to. And that is, I know we've talked about this a lot. And like I mentioned it like in pretty much every free trial session, that what I think is best for medicine is when the physicians are as diverse as the patients. And this is one thing that kind of goes into that, is that like if I am an African-American, but like all the physicians in my city are white, like it's really hard for me to connect and feel like they understand me. And that's something to be aware of as well. And like, you definitely need to like whatever you can do as a physician to try to help patients feel like you understand and you're kind of going with them. And I think taking particular care if they're coming from a background that's very different than yours, to like make sure that they understand that you're hearing them. I hear what you're saying. I understand what's going on. And I want to do whatever I can to help in this scenario. And that's something that you want to be aware of. And that kind of, once again, kind of goes into this persuasion stuff. Like people are just like, there've been studies that when the patient and the physician are the same like ethnic background, the patients are more likely to stick to the medications and like be, what's the word I'm looking for, compliant, and like rather than non-compliant with the medication stuff. And I think that's something to like I kind of wish it wasn't that way. And I know that we as individuals need to do what we can to lessen that effect. but we also need to be aware of it in other people as well. So that whatever you can do to make sure that your patients feel like you understand them and that you can do a good job, giving them advice for their health personally.
Yeah. And again, just to be very clear, what we've been talking up until this point, the different, forms of persuasion and whatnot, that's all testable. What we're talking about now is long-term, because again, that's always been part of our mission, to make sure that you guys we're preparing you to be good physicians, great physicians. And I also want to say that because our patients may have these biases doesn't make them bad people, right? It's a product of decades of, institutional problems, racism, difficulties, and just sometimes feeling like an outsider, or not heard. And so regardless of background, I've worked with patients from all backgrounds, and yeah, some of them were similar backgrounds, and they hear me speak Spanish or Portuguese, and they're like, okay, let's, we may be able to have this conversation. But I have other patients that come from very different backgrounds, and they're still hesitant. And so the best I could do, like you said, Phil, was making them feel heard. And so at the end of the visit, the conversation might be very different than the start. So that's what we want to say on that. You also want to think about just whatever beliefs they might have or that someone has, and recognize that in that case, central route is probably going to be a lot more important than peripheral route of processing, right? Because if they already have strongly held beliefs, you can't just throw somebody who looks nice in front of them and expect them to change their mind. Mm-hmm. If you have a patient who thinks smoking is actually not going to cause them cancer, or that it may cause cancer in other people, but not them. Just, saying, oh no, it's bad for you is not going to be enough. You're going to have to go into specifics with this patient. And the same on the exam, right? When they're talking about which of these might provide a longer lasting change in opinion. You're going to want to pick something, not their personality, not relatability, but something that falls more in line with the central route of processing.
Yeah. And that's a big thing, and something that I ran into with the patient I was talking about who went to the chiropractor and was told to quit taking their insulin. They bought into this. And so their belief is an inherent mistrust of medicine and a trust of this individual chiropractor. And that is how do I address that as someone who just doesn't trust me, and they have prior beliefs coming into this meeting that conflict with what I'm going to tell them. And that mm-hmm. is that can be a little bit challenging. It's a lot challenging, actually. It's very difficult sometimes, but I think you're right. Central route is good for that. And I love data. I love science. I love numbers. I love graphs and charts and figures. But for some people, anecdotal stuff is more important for them. And so, as a scientist, I kind of hate the anecdotal, taking the anecdotal angle to try to convince somebody of something. But saying oh, here's an example of somebody who is fine talking about how smoking gave them cancer, right? And they give talks around here. And this is a person who is in the area who has asked to be put in contact with anybody who says smoking doesn't cause cancer. If you want to talk to that person, they will tell you they had cancer, they're dealing with it. And that's going to be sometimes more powerful than going in and saying nope, smoking causes cancer, here's a graph. Because going through that is just kind of difficult. And there's this idea of belief perseverance, which is another MCAT term, where people tend to want to keep believing the thing they believed before. So once you have an idea, it's people tend to want to stick with that. That's especially true if there is a central route processing is how they were convinced, but it's also true just generally. People don't want to admit that they're wrong. And that's a whole other thing. I'm that's one of my favorite traits in a person is if they can admit when they're wrong, because I've been wrong lots of times, and that's how I grow, is admit I was wrong here. Mm-hmm. And I've learned from this, and now I'm better than I was before. And yep. I think an inability to admit you're wrong sometimes means you don't want to grow and you don't want to change. I should get off of my high horse here, because that's not what this is about. But people just don't want to admit that they're wrong. And so if you have a patient going through something, Especially when the information coming from the bad source is something that they want to hear. That's what makes it hard. I know you were talking about your terminal patient before. A lot of times they can be brought in by charlatans trying to sell snake oil, because they kind of want hope, right? If they've been told that, like, listen, medically, there's nothing else we can do, right? Like, there's nothing, and like they want hope, and so they'll turn to other angles, right? And sometimes people will take advantage of that. Not everyone, but there are people who will say, like, oh, I can do it with this weird mineral that's cost $10,000 to procure, and like, really it's nothing. And that is something that really hurts, as physicians, kind of like seeing, like, in the world around us, people take advantage of patients who are in problematic places, and that is something to be aware of. Oh my gosh, I feel like this took kind of a dark turn. Like, we were going to talk about just like sales stuff and Costco, which are some of
we always come back to patients, because at the core, that's what this is all about, right? That's why you're taking the MCAT. That's why you're trying to get into medical school. To be very clear, in case anyone is freaking out, that was not a HIPAA violation, because I've been in med school for 3 years and there was nothing identifying in that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I just needed to get that out of my system, just in case somebody was freaking out. But hopefully we have persuaded you that there's so much that goes into persuasion, into sales, the way that this manifests itself in our everyday lives and also in our future lives. And being aware of these things is important, not because they're going to necessarily uproot how we do everything, but they're worth knowing for the MCAT. They're worth knowing for just understanding the world around us.
Yeah. And so a lot of this stuff is testable.
Yes.
And I just want to reiterate this, because sometimes I feel like sometimes a listener might think that we're just talking about cool, fun, interesting stuff. Maybe, yeah. But this stuff, like the foot and door stuff, the primacy recency effect, the door in face technique, like the central versus peripheral route processing and the elaboration likelihood model, the fact that persuasion is more powerful when it's coming from people you like, people who are authority figures, people who have similar backgrounds, and people who have like if you have prior beliefs and how that can affect those interactions. Every single one of those things is testable on the MCAT. You'll see that probably in the psych section, but it's definitely something that you do need to know for this. And if it helps you make a good decision when you're shopping on Black Friday or Cyber Monday, then that's just an added bonus. But we want to make sure to do whatever we can to help you guys prepare for test day.